Hit Kickin' Country, Z94. Wild Bill in the midday. A very special guest is on the line with us, Pastor Cary Gordon. He is the pastor of Cornerstone World Outreach in Sioux City, Iowa. Pastor Gordon, I have talked to you several times on Twitter and Facebook, and it's finally great to talk to you one-on-one here on the phone.
Well, thanks for having me. I agree. It's good talking to you.
New Jersey law that was just passed by Governor Christie, which would bar licensed therapists from helping children overcome unwanted same-sex attractions. Tell me a little bit more about this law and what it means to pastors and also counselors out there.
Well, it's a terrible law. It's a dangerous, draconian law. It reminds you of some kind of a ridiculous thing that would happen in a fascist nation, not in America. And when you consider the fact that homosexual men are far more likely to engage in child sexual abuse than heterosexuals, and that the scientific data on that is essentially undisputed. For example, almost all child sexual abuse in the United States is committed by men, number one. Number two, less than 3% of American men identify themselves as homosexual, yet nearly a third of all cases of child sexual abuse are homosexual in nature, which means they involve men molesting boys. Now, as a parent, I have 2 boys and 2 daughters. I think every parent out there listening could just imagine if one of your little children comes home someday and they tell you the story about how they were just raped or molested by a same-sex person, an adult, and then a year after this tragic event, they start to share confusion with you about their sexual identity and say, I think maybe I'm homosexual. You have a right to take your child to your pastor, to your church, and get some kind of counseling to help them understand that their sexual confusion is the result of a crime that was committed against them. This crazy law in New Jersey would basically threaten your ability to keep your children, and they would consider it abuse, ironically, for you to try to get help for your child that was sexually molested by a homosexual pedophile. It is unbelievable how overt and shameless the left has acted with the homosexual agenda, and people need to wake up.
You know, and I think sometimes we get in an isolationist type of mentality. You know, people listening in Georgia here, the first thing they think of, well, okay, you have a point here, Pastor, and I agree with you, but that's in New Jersey. I'm here in Georgia. I don't see that happening in Georgia. And I guess the big question is, when will it happen in our state? Well, when will it happen in your state is the big question.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's going to happen if we don't rise up and stop it right now. And this is the same failure that the German people walked in back in World War II with Nazi Germany and Hitler. You know, and human nature, unfortunately, unless your head is on the chopping block, you tend to not care about what's going on around you. But at some point, it's your turn. And so we need to care about parental rights. We need to care about family rights. Whether they're threatening your house or not, they are threatening your neighbors. And certainly, I think we're all American citizens. And my heart goes out to, you know, people like the Gresham Bakery, Sweet Cakes Bakery in Gresham, Oregon, that was just put out of business on Sunday, harassed by homosexual people. My heart goes out to people in San Antonio that are looking at this week, their city council is going to vote on criminalizing speech. So if you say, I don't agree with homosexuality, you could be given a charge with a Class C misdemeanor, fined $500 a day or $15,000 a month. That's not free speech. So they're attacking on every front. It's unconstitutional. It goes against parental rights. And the worst thing about it, Bill, is you got a Republican signing off on this bill in New Jersey.
It's just absolutely ridiculous. And you know, just starting out from a basic ground level, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment?
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a right to disagree with things. We have a right to freedom. Freedom of religion is paramount to every other freedom that we have in this country. That's why it's in the First Amendment. The First Amendment is first for a reason. And, you know, a lot of people today in America don't go to church, so they don't seem like they care about religious freedom. In fact, I've looked at some really good data that suggests only 14% of the population of this country go to church on Sunday, and according to Barna, probably only 7% of that 14% are actually born-again Christians according to the Scriptures. So we're a paganized country, and so, if you don't go to church every week, maybe you don't care. But you need to care. Just because your head's not on the chopping block doesn't mean you're not next. And I keep telling this to the media, because the media, provides cover for corruption, and I call them the Gestapo. They provide cover for the homosexual agenda constantly. And the homosexual agenda, number one target is freedom of religion and freedom of speech. They are systematically tearing the First Amendment apart around the United States. I keep telling reporters when we get done with an interview, I say, you provide cover for them and you come interview me and you don't like what I'm saying, but free speech is in the First Amendment with freedom of religion. So while you're helping them trounce my religious rights, I want you to know you're next. You're not going to be able to report the news when they tell you they don't like it.
You mentioned some studies real quickly here about the connection between homosexual abuse and gay identity. Now, this isn't a study from Focus on the Family. These are stats from the CDC. There's a study from the Archives of Sexual Behavior. This is no bastion of conservatism. So this study is real. It's out there. And you get so sick of people where I believe they're a little bit anti-science when it comes to showing them facts that go against their ideology.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the Archives of Sexual Behavior, like you say, that is not a conservative organization, and yet they're saying 86% of offenders against males describe themselves as homosexual or bisexual. Folks, that's an incredible amount. That doesn't mean that every single homosexual man in America is a child molester, but it does prove that homosexuality is a significant risk factor for that horrible crime. Basically, according to the rates that we're looking at from the Center for Disease Control and other, politically neutral organizations, is that homosexual child abuse is about 10 times higher than you would expect based on the facts that less than 3% of American men identify themselves as homosexual. So this is a serious problem. And frankly, homosexual people, we all know biologically cannot reproduce. So it seems if you look at the data, the way that homosexuality is passed on to the next generation is sadly through criminal molestation. And frankly, folks, if the Gestapo shows up at my door, one of the threats made by the man proposing this bill in New Jersey is, if you take your child to a therapist and quote unquote abuse them by trying to tell them they're not homosexual, we're going to come take your children away because that's a form of child abuse. I'm telling you right now, if the Gestapo tries to come take my kids away, they better be bulletproof.
That's for sure. My wife shares the same sentiments as you. Boy, such an emotional argument here for sure. Why do you think these gay groups are pushing this as far as they are? What is their end goal?
Well, the end goal is very well articulated in Marxism and in Alinsky. Some of the things that he's published over the years. The end goal is that in order to control the population, you have to destroy traditional moorings that create what they believe is an illusion that the individual human soul has value. One of the obstacles to destroying the idea that the individualistic human has value is that you have to get rid of the classic example of a family. Why do they want individualism to be destroyed? Because they are essentially communist in their worldview or socialist. Marx believed that the greatest thing that could ever happen on earth is for all of us to stop thinking of ourselves as being independently valuable and see all of our value as a collective. This is an upside-down worldview that's contrary to the first principles of Americanism. So they have to destroy individual value. That's why they're so pro-abortion. Individuals have no value. They want to be pro-abortion. They don't want the traditional family in the way of their political agenda, and the end game is power. Power over everyone, because they believe in their twisted minds that government is the answer to all problems, and if we could just have absolute control of the people and the masses and everyone think of others in this big utopia, then we'll have a better world. Of course, they're completely crazy. And that is not realistic, and it's never going to happen. And we've seen that repeated throughout history. Marxism is an utter, absolute failure in history. We certainly don't want to try it for the 500th time in America now, just to find out that the last 499 times it failed is because it was a stupid idea.
Pastor Cary Gordon from Cornerstone World Outreach in Sioux City, Iowa. We appreciate you stopping by. How can we find out a little bit about your ministry and possibly some websites and what we can learn more about you?
Oh, sure. You can absolutely find out. You can go to www.peacemakersinstitute.com. And that is, I'm the founder of that institute. It's a political action group and a conservative think tank that teaches people to take conservative principles and apply them to the culture. And then you can also friend me on Facebook. It's Cary Pastor Gordon. For some reason, Facebook won't let me call myself Pastor Cary Gordon. So, Cary Pastor Gordon on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, Rev_Gordon, and join me in the information battle and the fight lies with truth.
All right. Thank you so much, Pastor Gordon. And there needs to be a lot of convincing, and unfortunately, we have to convince the Christians and the church that this is a real battle because so many of them don't believe or won't admit that this is the actual battle we're facing, and they think we're living in a different time 20 years ago, and that's not the case.
You're exactly right. The church has to wake up now, or their head's on the chopping block soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great